A virtual tour of China. This is a record of a trip that Lynn and I made about 12 years ago to China. We were there for almost a month, so we've had to collapse quite a lot of information into a fairly short period of time, but it will give you a pretty good overview of what China is like and some of the highlights that are there to see and enjoy. China is a large country. It's bordered by many other countries, and the Chinese government have really taken great pains to try and influence the countries that they border so that they fall in line with what the Chinese would like. That's particularly true of North Korea and Vietnam, perhaps a bit less so of some of the other countries, in particular Russia, of course, where the Chinese don't entirely get on with the Russians a lot of the time. We visited quite a lot of places. We went to Beijing, and from Beijing we saw the Great Wall of China. We then went to Wuhan and travelled up the Yangtze Gorge, past the dam to Chongqing. We went to Xi'an, where the Terracotta warriors exist, off to Chengdu to see the pandas, then to Lijiang, which is almost on the border of Tibet, which is a region of China. Very much regional with a completely different culture. From Lijiang, we took a day out to see the tiger leaping gorge, which Mao Zedong very much enjoyed. We then went to Guilin and had a trip along the Li River, where the famous cormorant fishermen operate. And finally, Shanghai, major port for China, that's been developed greatly over the last 30 years. Starting in Beijing, we had a very good guide in Beijing, a guy called Ben, who was a university professor of English, and he had been taken during the Cultural Revolution and made to work on a farm. He reckoned he learned nothing at all about farming, but he learned a great deal about how to drink beer, swear, and smoke cigarettes. He took us around all the sites of Beijing, and we've got a short video now just to show you some of the highlights of Beijing, capital of China. The people of China really enjoy their parks and public music, cards, Mahjong, of course, Tai Chi. And this is the Temple of Heaven, the park next to it. The temple was the model for Disney's Epcot Chinese exhibit. It's modeled on the Temple of Heaven, the one in Florida. Exquisite building built mainly out of timber. This is the Summer Palace. As you see, it was raining when we were visiting there. It's on the outskirts of Beijing. The emperor would go there in the summertime to avoid the heat of the summer. This is the long corridor, beautiful painted timber corridor leading out to the lake, where there is a stone boat built. They got a grant for the Navy and they used it to build this boat, a bit of the palace. Went for a wee trip on the lake there. Beautiful pagodas and these lovely Chinese bridges. They really know how to make beautiful looking bridges. This is modern Beijing, multi-lane highways, lots of traffic, the bird's nest that was built for the Olympic Games. And these are bicycle rickshaws in the older part of the town, the hutongs. They've preserved some of them mainly for tourist reasons, but a lot of Beijing used to be these hutongs. This is the edges of Tiananmen Square at night. They do enjoy lighting things up. They were also decorating it for National Day. Lots and lots of flowers in pots. They're not actually planted, just thousands of flowers in pots. There's Mr. Mao, Chairman Mao Zedong's grave, his mausoleum. And this is Tiananmen Square in the heart of Beijing and the entrance to the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City, of course, is where the emperor would live in the days of the emperor. And it's a series of courtyards, one after the other, where more and more elevated people were allowed to go. So only the most elevated were allowed to go into the inner quarters where the emperor would normally live, but he would come out and greet the citizens in some of the other courtyards when it was appropriate to do so. Of course, most people were never allowed into the Forbidden City at all. You had to be at least somebody to get even permitted to enter into the courtyard. In each courtyard, there is a big sheltered palace and a throne where the emperor would sit to watch the spectacle or to see the people that had come to see him. Quite a few tourists there. Most of them were Chinese people. There were some international tourists, but a lot of Chinese. Some beautiful bronzes of creatures, and of course lanterns. And there's one of the thrones. In each of the pavilions there was a throne where the emperor would sit. The craftsmanship was absolutely exquisite. Everywhere we went in China, beautiful, beautiful craftsmanship. Even the edges of the roofs decorated with terracotta figures. From Beijing, we took a trip to the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall was, in fact, constructed not as one wall, but as a number of individual walls protecting specific territories. And in the Qing dynasty, the walls were connected up to make one interconnected wall. It's a pretty long structure. They say it's the only structure you can see from space, but that's apparently a myth. You can't actually see it from space at all. But it is quite an impressive structure. Built like a Roman wall, a series of forts joined by a companionway that the soldiers could use to move from one fort to the other. Went up in a cable car, which saved us an awful lot of walking to get to the wall, and we walked maybe about a mile along the wall and then back again. Bits of it have been restored and are in quite good condition. Bits of it are not in so good condition. And you can see there were quite a large number of people there. It's a lovely day, and you can see the hinterland, really rough countryside that the wall was built in, very mountainous. Very fortunate because a lot of the atmosphere in China is polluted these days, and we just had a marvelous day, a nice sunshine day on the Great Wall of China. From there we moved to Wuhan. Wuhan's been famous recently because, of course, it was the source of the coronavirus that we've all been suffering from for the last couple of years. And from Wuhan, we joined our boat and we had a sail up through the locks on the Yangtze Dam and through the gorge of the Yangtze River to Chongqing. This is some boats in the lock. Our boat is the one that the picture was taken from, so we were just entering into the lock, and as were the two in front of us. And they managed to get 4 of these pretty large tourist boats into the locks. You can see the boats have obviously been designed to fit in the locks. They're exactly the right size, that they'll just fit and no more. Here we are approaching the dam. And this is a vertical boat lift that wasn't operational then, but I think is now, model of the dam. And the Chinese use the dam on the Yangtze to produce a vast amount of electrical power, a big generating station that produces power. That's a model of the boat lift. And there we see the dam. It was a slightly misty day. So we approached it, coming up to the locks. And entering the first lock chamber. It's a staircase of locks. There are 2 of them in parallel with each other. One is used for going up towards the Yangtze River lake, and the other one is used for coming back down again. This was the boat that we travelled on. We were on 3 days. There's about 500 kilometres between the dam and Chongqing. We were entertained on the boat by the crew, who don't only serve as crew but also served as entertainment troupe. So we had concerts every night in national dress, and we were entertained by them. A lot of shipbuilding along the side of the river, relatively small boats, and of course the traditional boats that they had. Times past, a temple on the side of the river, used for transporting heavy materials and also for transporting coal. We find quite a lot of places where coal was put into barges. You can see there some bunkers with coal, and the coal would be lowered down into the barges, and then they would travel along the river. Spectacular gorge, very, very deep. You can see there the water level a little bit low at the time we were there. There's a tide mark where the highest water level. But to build that dam, they drowned a number of cities and towns. I think about 4 million people were displaced. There's some monkeys on the side of the gorge. And they basically flooded their towns and cities and built new ones on the bank. This is Chongqing, which was the end of our trip. Somebody taking supplies off the boat. Theatre in Chongqing. This had been moved. It was previously under what would now be underwater, and they relocated it and rebuilt it. Chongqing. City Hall, again modelled on the Temple of Heaven in Beijing. People playing mahjong, which the Chinese love to play very quickly. And when we were on the Yangtze Gorge, we travelled up the Misty Gorge, or the Little Gorge, and you can't do that in the large boat that we were on, so we transferred into one of these smaller boats and visited the side gorge. This was a walkway to a temple on the side of the cliff. There's some other people, some Chinese people, enjoying a trip on the same size of boat as us. Gorge is quite spectacular, very, very steep sides. Our boatman sang to us. There's a coffin buried in the side of the thing, and here was our boatman who sang. Never quite took to Chinese music, I'm afraid. From the Yangtze Gorge, we moved on to Xi'an, which is a lovely, lovely city. I think it was one of the highlights of the tour was visiting Xi'an. It's a walled town, and the ancient walls, about 5 kilometers all the way around the wall. And they had the soldiers, ancient soldiers, reenacting what things were like on the wall. So this is a video of Xi'an. This was our hotel, the Xi'an Garden Hotel, had a lovely courtyard with a beautiful garden in the centre of it. And people in the morning were able to practice their Tai Chi before breakfast. They had a session from 7:30 in the morning until 8:30 in the morning. They could practice their Tai Chi and then get on with the day afterwards. Xi'an at night, they do like lighting up the buildings at night, the Chinese. And there we went to a dumpling restaurant. We had a meal with 32 different kinds of dumplings. This is street food and can't go to China without tea. This was a selection of teas being prepared for us so we could check out the relative qualities of different kinds of tea. And this was our guide in Xi'an, teaching us very important Chinese calligraphic characters. This particular one is the character that represents a lady's toilet. Very important if you happen to be a lady to recognize that, because it's the name for lady's toilet. These are the walls of the ancient city of Xi'an. Lots of lanterns for National Day and the people reenacting the troops. So their hotel, all dressed up for National Day. We found the Chinese very, very friendly, and a lot of young Chinese people learning English would approach us and ask us if they could practice their English. And they were always very polite and very nice and friendly. This is the Terracotta Warriors at Xi'an. Colossal number of these terracotta figures, which have largely been reconstructed from the rubble. The amazing thing about them is they all seem to be different. It's not a case of one mold with thousands of figures made from the same mold. They seem to be modelled on either real or imaginary people. And gradually they're piecing the bits together and repairing them and making entire intact figures. They start off as just a pile of rubble, which is put together like a jigsaw puzzle. They find all the bits that fit together and they assemble them and then restore them. Some very stern looking faces there. These are obviously officers. There's the rubble. That's the way it starts off before the restorers get their hands on it and put all the pieces together and remake them into this, for example, which is an archer. And I think this gentleman is a general or an officer of some sort. That's his horse. And he is standing with his horse. This was for the Olympics. They made this gigantic model of one of the terracotta warriors. There's also a second set of warriors, which are much, much smaller, but they reckon they were fully clothed when they were put into the grave. And there was a complete collection of everything you could possibly want. Animals, implements, entertainers, soldiers, of course, horses, carts. And these, they reckon, the Terracotta Army were not dressed, but they reckon these were dressed. So this is their idea of how these models would be clothed when they were put into the grave. Quite impressive. From Xi'an, we flew to Chengdu. And the first thing we saw in Chengdu was a Buddhist temple. It's, of course, famous for the pandas. It's where one of the main panda centers in China is. But first of all, we went to see a Buddhist temple in Chengdu. The Chinese government, in spite of being communist, seems to be quite happy for religion to be practiced. And this particular temple was not unusual. There were quite a few active temples, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism. Most of them were. They don't seem to be quite as keen on Muslim and Christian religion, but they seem to be quite happy with the Oriental religions. This monk there. Went to visit the Pandas. They have a fairly impressive centre where they do the conservation and breeding of the giant panda. They do look very cute. I wouldn't want to have an encounter with one, but they look very pretty. Their main food is bamboo. And the problem, I think, is that they have to eat a vast amount of it. There's not much nourishment in bamboo, so they have to eat an awful lot of it to be fully nourished. And there isn't really enough habitat for them to thrive in the wild. So I'm not entirely sure what the long-term future is for these animals. But certainly the Chinese have certainly made a point of trying to do conservation work and trying to breed new ones. That's what a wee panda looks like when they're born. These are red pandas, which are in the same place, much smaller, of course. Quite cute looking funny creatures. And a nice garden. We really enjoyed the Chinese gardens. Wherever we went, there were always very pleasant gardens. From Chengdu, we went to Lijiang. Lijiang is completely different, very, very rural community, famed for its mountain, the Jade Dragon Snow Mountain, which is in the background of the picture there. And Lijiang itself is a World Heritage Site, which is protected by UNESCO, and it's entirely vehicle-free. In order to get into Lijiang, we had to move all our luggage onto hand carts, and they were wheeled into a hotel. We had to walk. So there's no vehicles at all inside the town of Lijiang. It's typical of the streets. It's on a slope with a lot of water running down, and water wheels were used to provide motive power. Local shaman. And this is a temple by the lake in Lijiang. We're entertained by local musicians. Also went to a concert. The bridge over the lake. A lot of local people come there to have their photographs taken in national costumes. There's a young girl dressed up in national costume. This is local language in Baisha, runic language, and absolutely exquisite embroidery work that we're doing there. We went up the Jade Dragon Snow Mountain. It was a really not nice day. It was raining and foggy, but it was on the itinerary, so we jolly well went there anyway. I spent a whole day going up in the cable car to the top of a foggy mountain. Do not disorder rubbish here, it says. Lijiang had very good counters in the evenings for street food. You could go and buy food from a stall. Generally speaking, we found the food was excellent in China. There was a lot of variety, much more than I had expected there was going to be. And apart from our one meal of 32 dumplings, we ate well with a great lot of variety. This is the Tiger Leaping Gorge. You can see the gentleman down there. You can see roughly the size of these waves and the spray. And we took a trip from Lijiang to the Tiger Leaping Gorge, driving through open countryside, very much farming land. Relatively poor, most of the people of China. This was a Mao Zedong memorabilia stall, because Mao found this one of his favorite places in China was Tiger Leaping Gorge. He claims to have swum in the river here, but quite frankly, I doubt very much that he really would. The current is quite strong, and I'm not sure. Giving perspective on the size of these waves. Beautiful day out. From Lijiang, we went to Guilin, which is the place where the Li River is. And this is a picture of the Li River. The mayor of Guilin has cleaned up the river. Most rivers in China are somewhat polluted, but the Li River is completely clear, beautiful clear water, and has become very much a tourist attraction with these boats going along. It's in what they call karst country, which is limestone that's been severely eroded. So you get these fantastic mountainous features along the side of the river. And of course, this is the centre where cormorant fishing is done. I think it's done now almost entirely for the benefit of tourists. I don't really think they catch too many fish. They tie a string around the cormorant's neck so it can't swallow the fish, and then they take the fish away from them. This is somebody else's video because I forgot to take my camera the day that we went to cruise on the Lee River, but it was pretty well like it's depicted here. It really is a beautiful part of the world. Just to prove that we really were there, there's Lynn during our Lee River boat trip. You can see there's some water buffalo, and they're eating vegetation which is growing on the floor of the river. The water is so clean and clear that light gets through it, and the vegetation on the bottom of the river grows quite profusely. Another view of the limestone karsts from the boat on the Lee River. Guilin itself is a beautiful town. They have really decided to make tourism their major source of income, so it's very nicely decorated. It was round about National Day, but I think these lanterns probably are there most of the year round. We like them so much that we brought 6 of them back home to add to our Christmas decorations. So bend in the river in Guilin, which is widened out into a lake, and they enjoy boating on the lake. This was it at night. They light up the buildings, and they also light up the bridges across the lake at night. Again, the inevitable street food, and quite a substantial street market in Guilin. There were a lot of young people enjoying the market at night. Down by the river is what they call Elephant Rock. It's meant to look a bit like an elephant. You have to use your imagination, I think. And they were demonstrating the traditional fishing methods. I don't really think they catch very much, to be honest. I think it's more of a tourist attraction than a real method of earning a living by catching fish. And elephants made out of concrete in the water for people to enjoy, for the kiddies to play with and what have you. A couple of girls earning a few shillings by dressing up in national costume and having their photo taken. And a tea plantation in Guilin, where they showed us how you pick tea, 2 leaves and a bud. It's then heated and then placed into balls and fermented for a short period of time. This is how they make the tea. And then demonstrated how to actually produce tea, and let us sample it at the end of the process. After Guilin, we went to Shanghai. Shanghai is a major port in China. This is the old side of the river, if you like, which was developed quite a long time ago. And the other side of the river has all been developed over the last 30 years. So there was nothing on the other side of the river. Now there is, of course, this famous building, which Shanghai, it's the radio station, in fact, but Shanghai can be recognized right away from looking at the building. Went for a trip on the river. And that's the modern side. That's all less than 30 years old. We went up to the very, very top of the Jin Mao Tower. Quite a substantial building, and that's looking down inside the Jin Mao Tower to the reception of the Hilton Hotel inside. They call this one the bottle opener, this building, because it looks a bit like a bottle opener, and that's the view from the top of the Jin Mao Tower. Lovely gardens in Shanghai. So it's not all modern. There's some really nice pieces of traditional material, including these minimalist interiors. Shopping streets. Where we bought our lanterns. And this is the French Quarter, which is very European in architectural style. quite a substantial bit of Shanghai is still the French Quarter. I'll end with Shanghai at night. This is the Bund, which is what they call the promenade along the river in Shanghai. And here we have a short video of the Bund at night. This is the reduced illuminations. They were criticised for using so much power to light everything up. They decided that they would reduce it greatly. So this is the reduced level of illuminations on the Bund at night. I hate to think what it was like when it wasn't reduced. So there you are. Thank you very much indeed for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I look forward to seeing you again when we have our proper Probus meetings back at the Rose Social Club.